Okay, so welcome back everyone, and we've now got our very special session with Micky Adams. So I'm just sharing my screen. You should be able to see the introduction there. He's 7 times British champion. His highest ever on the FIDE list was 3rd, and his highest FIDE rating was 2761. And he's been, well, he played a very amazing competition in 2004, and he was that close to becoming the world champion. So he's England's best ever chess player, and we're very, very happy to have him here today. So I'm going to get started with the Q&A, and then he's going to show off some of his interesting games from when he was a child. So hi, Micky. Say hi to everyone.
How's it going, everyone?
So just say hi in the chat as usual, and if you've got any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. That's a lot better, because if you do it in the Q&A, I can timestamp when they're being answered. We might not be able to answer all of them. Some of you have already given us questions, which is great. So let's get going. So I'll just give you a brief history of Micky Adams. So born in 1970, he learned to play chess aged 7, and he started recording his games when he was 9. That he then became the British under-11 champion, and he made his British Championship debut in 1985 when he was 14 years old. He then went on to win the silver medal at the World Under-16 Championships, and he became an international master when he was 16, and then a grandmaster at 17, and that year he also became British champion. So he's got, I mean, I could write lots more achievements on this, but they're his main ones. But he's achieved a lot in chess, and like I say, he's widely regarded as the best ever English chess player.
Sorry, so, I should just say, I know I was supposed to check this earlier, but I was actually born in 1971. I'm not quite 50 yet.
Sorry. Not quite 50. Oh, the big one's coming up then.
Yeah, I'm hoping we might be out of lockdown by then.
Yeah, big party. No, that's great. So yeah, I mean, you guys can have a look. Where are you on that journey? Does anyone feel like there's somewhere on there? Do we have any British under-11 champion here in the audience? Forget who the current British under-11 champion is. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And here we're going to talk about openings. So lots of juniors are sort of learning loads and loads of openings and saying, do I need to learn a new one because my opponent knows what to do against me? So I'll just firstly ask you, Micky, what do you think about that? Should they learn a new opening when they think, oh, my opponent knows what to do, I need to learn a new opening? Or should they just stick to the same one and know it really well?
Well, I think when you're starting off in chess, it's important to play a lot of different openings, not necessarily directly because of a particular opponent you're playing against, but just because that's the way that you develop your knowledge of chess and your style. Because I saw you asking a little bit about the French defense, and when I played the French when I was younger. I mean, I think I played pretty much every main defense to 1e4 at some point in my career, and that's true of pretty much all the opening systems as well. I mean, when I first started, I was playing Sicilian Dragon, if you can believe that. And then I moved on to Sicilian Najdorf. After that, I got progressively more cautious in my opening choices. But I think when you're for instance, when you're black against e4, you have 2 choices with e5 and c5 where you kind of fight on equal terms in terms of space. And then you have openings like the French, Caro-Kann, maybe Perk, Modern, Alekhine, where you're less concerned about space. You allow white to get a space advantage to fight back against. And that's sort of the thing that I think you discover how you feel about space. A lot of players, as they get older, they tend to appreciate space more. I'm not quite sure why that is. Maybe because often when you lose a game where you don't have much space, it's not a very pleasant experience. But I think it's a good idea to try a lot of different openings, but I don't think you should see it necessarily, the time to refine your opening repertoire is more as you get older and stronger. And as you get stronger, you need to work more on the openings to play them. When you're starting off and you're not so strong, you can experiment a lot more in the opening because the games vary a lot more after the opening stage, as long as you get some kind of playable position. It's not, you don't need to know the latest theory and every novelty or to play something very sharp. It's a lot about getting a feel for positions and working out which ones suit you and why they suit you as well, perhaps, and how you feel about the bishop's pair or double pawns or things like that. So I think you want to, I see it more as a slightly more long-term view to play a lot of different openings. I don't think when I was doing it when I was younger, I was thinking in anything like these kind of long-term concrete terms, but I basically did end up trying a lot of different openings. And of course, you know, when you try a different opening, you may, well, when I was younger, it was a rather less high tech, so you tended to read opening books, but you know, there are lots of different ways, but it encourages you to use the resources that are around in those openings, however you want to do that, whether that's websites or annotated games in ChessBase or whatever you want, DVDs or whatever you want to use.
Oh, that's great. So these days, how much time do you spend like on your openings?
Well, you tend to spend quite a lot of time on openings when you're a strong player, but then opening analysis goes a very long way. So you sort of say, oh, you spend a lot of time looking at openings, but then openings don't really end at move 8 or 10. You know, they might have lines that go directly to an end game, and there will be multiple kind of variants at all different different lines. And you're also kind of looking for ideas, I think, which is perhaps the main thing you're doing. You're trying to come up with something new and fresh. You're not just kind of looking to reproduce whatever's been played. So you're kind of looking at perhaps games with recent ideas and also trying to come with your own ideas. So you're always kind of looking at moves perhaps that haven't been played before or haven't been played very much. You're not really looking to just completely recreate. But I don't know. I mean, I think now modern preparation definitely goes deep into the middle game. So I think even when you're looking at openings, it's not quite as concrete. Sometimes I will look at end games, or sometimes I might just, I don't know, sometimes I'll get ChessBase magazine and I might just look at the end game section there and do the exercises or something. It just depends. Or I might look at something in a chess magazine, or I might just see a game online and they're playing some end game that I think looks interesting, and then I might analyze that. So it just depends. Most of my structural work is on openings, but I look at other stuff in a more haphazard manner, or sometimes I do tactical exercises, maybe from a book or maybe from a magazine.
Okay, that's really good. So lots of juniors tend to just learn loads of moves by rote, not really understanding why they're doing those moves. So they just kind of read it in a book and make files and say, I need to do that move because the book says I should do that. What would you say to that?
Well, when I sort of study an opening, you'll go, okay, this is the main line. But then I would tend to immediately wonder, why is that the main line? Why can't you do this instead? And I think you want to kind of understand why it's the main line, and there is a reason why things are the main line. It does make sense. But you know, it's only sometimes when you've looked at the sidelines that you then understand the main line a bit better, because it gives you ideas of what sides are trying to avoid or positions that are considered to be favorable to one side. Just looking a long way down the main line without looking at any of the alternatives or sidelines doesn't necessarily help you, because your opponent may not know this long line and may do something else which is, you know, perfectly plausible or sensible, and then you may just be kind of trying to work out the kind of things that perhaps you should have worked out in your preparation over the board, particularly now when you get computer input a lot. I mean, often I'll be working with the engine and the engine will give me some line and I just find it absolutely crazy, and I'll be trying to work out exactly how this line works, and often I just kind of give up on continuations like this just because they don't make any sense to me, and particularly ones where you have maybe one good move in lots of positions. The computer will say, oh, this is good, but you find if you make one move which is not optimal, your advantage is going away very fast. It's a good position for computers because they don't make mistakes. They can always find an accurate move in the sequence, but for humans, it's not so straightforward. So it's kind of nice to have a position where you can play a good move and the computer confirms it's a good move, then the computer tells you it's a good position because you play X move. This isn't so useful when you're at the board because you're not going to be able to find these things at the board unless you get the exact sequence, which is, well, okay, everyone will know how often they get the exact sequence. If they get the exact sequence, their preparation is great. They don't need my advice, but normally it doesn't, in my experience, it doesn't work out quite like this, that your opponent comes with some surprise, or you don't get what you predicted, or you haven't looked in quite enough depth. So then it helps to have a position that you can at least play over the board as well.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you. So yeah, I'm going to come to the questions at the end. I've already got quite a lot written down, so we'll see how we do for time. Okay, I wanted to ask you, Micky. So you grew up in Cornwall, which is quite far out. It's not near London and the main chess tournaments that were going on in your youth. Did you think this was good for your chess, or do you think it hindered your improvement as a junior?
Well, a bit of both. I mean, I think at the time I thought, and I think everyone just thought, that this was definitely a bad thing, which is quite reasonable. Obviously, in those days, there was no internet chess. So, you know, all the tournaments were over the board. And also, you know, wasn't really possible to do any kind of training except person to person. So there weren't really so many strong players in Cornwall. You know, I was already, I think, 11, 12, winning the Cornish Championship. So it wasn't that convenient for me in that sense. So that was definitely a downside, that I had to do a lot of traveling, because Cornwall was a really long way away from anywhere. It's, you know, 5 hours on the train to London. It's not, it really is, you know, down the bottom of the southwest. So that was definitely, I think, a drawback. I mean, I didn't really have very much in the way of training at all. There were occasionally there would be some kind of training weekends where there might be, you know, 1 or 2 days, and there'd be a large group of juniors there and be some kind of lectures. I had some kind of training from Sean Talbot, but in general, this mainly consisted of him sending me exercises in the post and me looking at them sometimes. So it was really, it's pretty much as low tech as it can go. I mean, you know, it's not really that different to sort of having a book in some ways. So that was definitely, you know, that was definitely a drawback, but, you know, there's nothing much to be done about it. That was just the way it was. You know, my parents traveled with me a lot to enable me to play in tournaments. And, you know, we often had summer holidays at the British Championship several years. So, you know, they were very helpful in that respect, which, you know, minimized that problem. But I would say the advantage that I don't think I realized for quite a long time, but I think in retrospect it was quite useful because I thought more independently. I think when you have access to a lot of training, or a lot of training facilities, and even to some extent now with computers, they have a big influence on you. Whereas I just sort of had to work out a lot of things for myself. And that may have been harder, but it was certainly more valuable. And I think things that you learn yourself are very important. No matter how much training you have, whenever you play chess, you're completely on your own. So I think you always have to bear this in mind. And I think sometimes people think that there is an external solution which will solve problems for them. And often, to some extent, you have to work out things for yourself. Of course, external help can be very useful. But I think that was perhaps the advantage that I had being in Cornwall, because I learned to think about things for myself a lot from an earlier age than perhaps some other people who lived nearer to people who gave them tuition did.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thanks for that. We'd now like to look at some of your games when you were a junior. So I'll stop sharing my screen. If you could share yours. And we'll
Yep, okay.
3 very good games from when you were younger.
Okay. Okay.
Can
everyone see that?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So is the notation showing up, or you?
Yes, it is. So yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So yeah. Okay. Should I go from the start in this game, or?
Well, it's up to you, or you could maybe give a bit of an introduction, and how old you were at this time. I think it was, is this the World Under 16?
So this, okay, yeah, okay. So this was a game from the World Under 16 against Ilya Gurovich, who was actually a very strong American player who went on to become a grandmaster, but at some stage he basically stopped playing chess and got a full-time job in finance, and well, he hasn't been in the chess world too much since, but he was a very strong player, and I think, you know, round about for a long time we were quite similar strengths. Yeah, I think he also played, if well, all the people here are probably too young to remember, but he played quite a few times, for instance, in the Lloyds Bank Masters and stuff like that in the 80s. So he was quite a well-known, he's a nice guy. So, and this was, I don't remember exactly which round this was, but I think it was towards the later. I think it was on one of the top boards. And so I'm playing white here. It's actually my turn. This was actually a game from the French defense that we were talking about earlier. And again, white sort of established the strong central presence, but obviously my development is quite lacking. I've castled by hand, just moved my king over from f1 to g2. So we'll let so perhaps we'll just let people make suggestions as to white's as to the move I played here and why I played that move.
Yeah, so if you write your answer just to all panelists, please don't write it to everyone, and then Micky will go through the answer in a few minutes when we've got some answers. So white to play, you can take your time, it's important to think about this. So white to play, what do you think white played here? And if you can write why, that would be very useful as well. And they're all thinking, that's good. I'm always telling them off for going too quickly.
Yeah. Okay, so I can actually see the chat and see this.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Don't worry.
You're monitoring the answers, are you? Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, we've had one move that doesn't make any sense to me. Bishop d6, but I don't doesn't make sense to me because it's white to play.
It's maybe bishop e3, but that's not a good move anyway.
No. We've had bishop takes e6 lots of times.
Yep. Okay.
Bishop takes e5. I think he meant 6. Knight e2 as a suggestion.
Knight e2. Yeah, that's also quite plausible.
Yeah, we'll go through them all at the end. Knight d4 to get the rook out. I think he means like.
Not sure what that is.
Come on, get your notation right. This is getting embarrassing. So an explanation there. Bishop takes e6 because it basically stops the king from moving and attacks the d5 pawn. Bishop f4. Another knight e2. And we have had one very good answer, which I won't reveal yet, from Rohit. Okay, so I'll just give you another minute or two, and then Micky will go through those options. Charlie said a kind of Najdorf idea. A3 stops bishop on e7 developing, and the c knight. Okay, another good answer from Theo.
I mean, perhaps another question which might be interesting to think about if might be what Black's next move might be here if it was Black's turn.
Yeah, because we were talking in the session earlier on positional chess about prophylactic thinking and look what your opponent's trying to do, and they were getting familiar with that. Okay, so yeah, Theo, don't go into the study, please. Please close that down because then you're not doing yourself any favors. Yeah, thank you. So you'll be sent that out afterwards. Okay, so white to play. We've had a few correct answers now. So the options, the moves that you could go for if it's okay, Micky.
Yeah.
People have said knight g5. Lots of people, the bishop takes e6.
Yeah.
Maybe do the arrows for them if you want. We've had knight e2. We've had, what else did I say? Bishop e3.
Yeah.
And we've had, I think, 4 people with bishop g4, which.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, I mean, bishop e3. I mean, one problem. I mean, any move of the bishop from c1 is that one problem is that this pawn can be captured with check. But bishop e3, I mean, possibly even better is to take on e5 because there's a pin of the queen on the bishop here. So that's not a great idea. So the bishop should stay there. Knight g5. Well, there's a problem with that it leaves quite a number of things hanging. I'm not quite sure what the best way to deal with it is. The pawn on d4 is on prise, which I think is one of the bigger problems. Perhaps the simplest is to take the knight and then just play queen takes d4 here. So it's much too loose. I mean, my position here is quite loose, really, and I'm looking to try and consolidate things. I mean, in this line, white takes liberties with development, but the idea is to consolidate a very strong pawn structure. And if black isn't able to do something immediately, then white will gradually just continue developing his pieces and get quite a good position. So knight e2 that I think some people mentioned is a pretty sensible move. That perhaps goes to the question, which I don't know if anyone did answer, as to what black's next move might be. And the move that I would have been thinking about with black would be actually to give up a piece in this position, to take on e5 with the idea takes. So obviously I can't capture the knight because it's mate on f2. And then to try and get the central pawns rolling. So for instance, if after something like rook f1, let's say, something like takes, e5, and it starts to, black starts to be coming very quickly. There's rook f8 check threatened. These pawns are moving very forward very fast. I don't have much development. These kind of things could be quite dangerous. And I think even if it was black to move here, I think it's quite possible that he would also be considering knight takes e5. You also have to think about the position from black's point of view, because it's not actually so easy for black to make a useful move here. And that was why I actually played the move in the game, which is really strangely just to give a flight square to my king. So the move I played, which I think some people got correctly. Yeah, actually the arrows are showing it everywhere. So I mean, the main point from this is if black was to do the same now, it just simply doesn't work because I can capture on e5 and my king just goes to hide on h3 and there's no real way to continue the attack. This h6 square is covered by my bishop. I can continue with knight f3 next. My rook comes out and my king isn't in any real danger. And the problem is after this bishop g4, well, actually it's not so, it's actually not very easy for black to make a useful move. Sorry, actually a lot of people said bishop takes e6, didn't they?
Oh yeah.
Well, again, we have the sort of same problem with this move. I mean, I think actually it's possible to maybe take even this way, because then the queen attacks the bishop along the rank. But black can also, if he prefers, take with the knight here, because if I take here, then black can take here, so he's not actually losing a piece, and the whole white's whole center is totally dismantled, and black's left with a very pleasant lead in development. So taking on e6 is definitely not a good idea. I mean, in fact, there are even positions, if you look at the theory of this line, where in fact sometimes white can take on e6 with check, and white still doesn't do it simply because it's just too risky to put the bishop on an exposed square. But just on g4 is actually very well placed. And it gives also another option for me to maybe bring out my knight to h3. And on h3, this is quite a useful square because it can go either forward to g5 or f4, two very nice squares. but also it's very useful because it covers backward the square on f2, because we kept on seeing these mating ideas for black. So it's a very multi-purpose square. And also, of course, after bishop g4, white's also ready to go knight e2. Again, it's not possible to take on e5, so the knight could develop in two different ways. Or if white, is in a hurry, could even maybe consider a move like h4, just gain some more space on the king side. Just keep on improving the position if not much is happening. So I don't know if you're happy with that.
Yeah, that sounds great. And well done to everyone that got that right. I think just a few people. Shout out to Charlie, Theo, Rohit. I think was the first to get it right. So
yeah, a good prophylactic move there.
Well done. Okay, yeah, let's move on to the next one, which was against Matthew Sadler. We had him talking to the academy.
Or do you want to, because there are some more positions from that game?
Oh yeah, of course. Sorry.
Do you want to do that? Or?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's go.
Actually, if we see Black's next few moves, where you can see he was kind of reduced to a kind of very passive plan. Next few moves. Okay, I mean, here I should have taken the knight on h6 after we spent lots of moves taking it there. Anyway, we'll move on. Various things happened. I don't think I played in the best over the next few moves, but we won't have time to go through everything. So we'll just move on to this position. So it's actually Black to play here. And he actually, well, okay. Perhaps we can have a bit of a think about this position. He actually played g6 here. And knight d5 is another move, which I'd be curious to know what people think about. And possibly to work out why he chose to play g6 and what the idea was behind that move. And also other ideas or suggestions for Black. So there's obviously an opposite colored bishop position, but white has quite a bit more space. So still, there's still quite complicated because there's a lot of pieces on the board still and a lot of open files. So not a simple position at all. So we'll let people have a little look at that one.
Yeah, sounds good. Just write your answers to the panelists when you're ready. It's quite an interesting position, this. So take your time. Okay, somebody's written g6 to stop knight a5.
Okay.
There's been a question, can you flip the board around?
I don't know, can I?
It's at the top there.
Oh, flip board. Yeah. You want me to do that?
Yeah, you can do if they're thinking about it from that perspective.
Whole different perspective.
Yeah, different game now. Siobhan, maybe g6 was played because g6 by white followed by h6, knight h5, frightening. Bishop takes h6, g takes h6, knight f6 check seems very good for white. That's from Siobhan.
Yeah, okay, there's certainly some good logic to that answer. I'm not sure all the details are 100% correct, but yeah, that's certainly
good.
That certainly makes sense. That the reason he played g6 was certainly, I think, to prevent me playing g6 at some moment. That I think is correct.
Okay, and then
Charlie serves as a clue for anyone.
Yeah, definitely. And then Charlie said g6 looks good, but I definitely like bishop c6. It makes bishop really powerful and gains the tempo on the rook.
Yeah, bishop c6 certainly has some merit. I would agree with that.
Stanley to blockade the weakness, the double pawns. That's why he said g6. Theo, white had the idea of g6, so that might be why Black played g6. So some prophylactic thinking. I'll just read them all out and you can go for it. And then Anna, g6 was played for two main reasons: to stop white from going g6, to stop knight a5 ideas, which may be coming. And then we've got g6 from Arian, and then Charlie Hill, g6 rook h2 looks really powerful. That's why I don't like g6. So an interesting range of answers here. I think Black played g6 over knight d5 because it allows Black to enter the h5 square with their knight. And Daniel Walker likes bishop c6. But I don't know whether he's worried or not about knight takes e6, but he's written knight e6. Okay, yeah, so lots of answers there.
Okay, well let's look a little bit at knight d5 first, maybe, because that I think was one of the key variations I remember from the game. So I think someone wanted to play g6 here, was that right?
Yeah, I think so.
Which actually does look like quite a good idea, because it's certainly not that desirable for white to play, for black to play h6 here, because it's the h file is going to get open. This pawn is very dangerous. But the computer actually suggested here that, in fact, it's not so bad for black just to play like this, where this pawn is kind of shielding the king. I mean, I think I remember this from the game. That well, okay. I don't know if anyone had any suggestion for white here.
Anyone got any suggestions for white? And it might be a good idea to flip it back from white's perspective now, since we're looking at it from.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll flip
That's
it.
all right.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, yeah. So what have we got here? No, I don't think people have put suggestions.
Okay, well let's give white a move here, and we'll just give takes, and see if we can find a good move for white here.
Okay, sounds
to
good.
Make it a little bit easier, as we've got a few positions to look at still.
Yeah. Okay, so white to play here. If you just let us know your suggestions, please. So we've got what we've got coming through. So we've got rook h2, bring the other rook across. We've got g6 followed by bishop h6, bishop b5.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Do they mean bishop b4?
Yeah.
Bishop
Come on,
b4.
guys. This is embarrassing. You need to...
Okay. Well, bishop. Okay. Well, let's have a look at bishop b4. So if bishop b4 and black goes rook f7, how could white maybe play here?
G6, they're saying.
So g6 and black takes, and then
What should white do now? Rook h2 has been suggested.
Yeah, rook h2, that's totally right. So now you can see black's king is just totally caught. Actually, his rook doesn't have any squares to go to this bishop on b4. I mean, it's a funny position because the bishop on d7 looks very good because it can come to the long diagonal, but actually my bishop also has some very good squares to come to, particularly when it gets to this diagonal. So I think that was why he didn't like knight d5, because after bishop b4, well, the computer likes a lot for white, actually. I mean, black is forced to either lose the exchange or move his rook away from the f file, which leaves his kingside looking very... So I think that was why, I mean, then he was looking to go g6 with the idea to have rook f7 to cover. Bishop c6 is interesting, but of course it has the problem that it leaves the pawn on e6 on prise. So when white makes some move, I'm not sure where the best square is, but perhaps rook h2. The problem is that this pawn is still hanging and there's still the ideas of g6 to come next move, which is particularly tough when the knight is still here supporting the pawn. So anyway, I'll just carry on a little bit in this game.
Yep.
I mean, after g6, knight, I mean, he went at now knight d5, which was not a good idea. He had to kind of maybe play some other move, perhaps rook e8, preparing bishop c6, but anyway, because I was able to throw in a check. So I think actually this position looks to me pretty much winning for white, because just this passed pawn is so strong. I mean, positions with rooks and opposite colored bishops are completely different from opposite colored bishop positions. If you just have opposite colored bishops, it can be quite hard to win, even if you have a very favorable situation with pawns, particularly like here where all my pawns are on dark squares and he can control the light squares. But with rooks, it's a completely different story, because then your rook can kind of combine with the bishop to cover the squares that your bishop doesn't. And so you can still control the whole board. When you only have a bishop left, and particularly opposite bishops, then your opponent will control half the squares on the board and you control half. And that greatly increases the drawing tendency. But anyway, we'll just actually zip forward a bit. basically is a very difficult position for black, because if his rook goes to f7, my bishop goes to e7 and it gets stuck. But if it stays on d7, well, my bishop will go to e7 anyway, and he gets cut off from the king side, which was pretty much what happened in the game. So anyway, various things happened. So perhaps we can find a good move for white here. We've got the board the right way up for once. So any suggestions for white here? Well, in fact, there are two moves that are worth thinking about. I'm happy to have analysis of both of them, maybe even.
Yeah, king h6 and f7 have been suggested.
Okay.
Rook h7 as well.
Okay.
But if you're going to say a move like rook h7, you need to give us some detail. You can't just
maybe. Well, okay. Let's say f7 and rook h7 are good options, so maybe they might want to try and take those lines a little bit further.
Yeah.
Go a few moves deeper in those two lines.
Yeah, definitely.
What would be black's best defense after rook h7, and how would the game continue after f7?
So, bit of detail coming through. Rook takes h7 followed by rook h8 check, f7 winning. Well, you need to give.
Okay, well let's just let's have a look at rook takes h7. So let's say black recaptures, and I guess people want to go f7. So is this just winning? What's black's best move here?
So Shivam says rook d8 defends.
Okay, so that's very good. So
very good, yeah.
The problem with this, it's maybe not such a problem, but okay, it's not instantly winning, as I think some of you may have thought, or white is not making a queen by force. Because at some stage, white would have to take the rook, and then black can go king g7. I mean, this position may well still be winning, because I guess I would make a queen and take the pawn here, and I'm not absolutely sure about this position. But this pawn on a5 is hanging and looks certainly like a tough endgame. I'm not absolutely sure of the assessment, but it's not completely winning. So if you were going for rook takes h7, certainly you should be having some thoughts about this before jumping in. So the other line which was suggested was f7, which was actually what was played in the game. So he went there. So how should white continue here? I guess you all had some idea here. You didn't just jump in.
We had
okay,
good. Proof from Theo. King takes f7, rook takes h7, king g8, king h6, and black's king is stuck in a mating net. King
h6. So very good. So that's the point, because okay, here is a disaster because of bishop e4 picking off the rook. So in fact, it's the only move not to lose, as well as the only move to win in this case, king h6. So it's important to see this detail. So the problem is really that black's king is simply stuck here. It doesn't really matter too much what he does. I mean, something like rook takes d4. Well, if you want, people can give suggestions. There are probably lots of ways to win. Probably rook f7 is quite easy, but also I guess rook takes g6 and bishop f6 mate is threatened. So in the game he played, but I was able to gain a little bit of time, threat of rook f8 check, and then check a little bit more. Okay, he actually resigned. With king h8, obviously I would have continued bishop f6, giving mate. So I think a few people got that one, so very good. Should we move on to another?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe because
do you want to do more chat?
Yeah, we're a bit short on time, so I was thinking maybe we could go to that key point in the Sadler game, and then we'll move back to the Q&A.
Do you want to just go to the quick
the key point,
of points?
The piece bit in the middle.
Okay, we'll just go to that.
And then we'll come back to the Q&A, because I've got quite a lot more questions for Micky.
Okay, so we're just here. So So I played knight d2. So what should black play here? Or what two moves are worth considering here?
Yeah, this is quite hard.
So this is
think deeply here.
So this is a game against Matthew Sadler, who has been a very long time rival of mine. He's a bit younger than me, but not too much. So we played a lot of junior events together. We were both quite young when this game was played. Hard though it is to believe now.
Yeah, Matthew Sadler came and talked to the Academy about his book, which was quite instructive. So they know him. Yeah, so black to play. What should black play? And we've had two good moves coming in. Bishop h5. There's also another seemingly good move that nobody's mentioned yet. So
well, okay, there are only really two possibilities.
Yeah.
Bishop
So
h5 and bishop takes e4. So really, it's a question of how do they assess bishop takes e4?
Yeah,
Perhaps is another
that's
way
a much better way
to put this question. So if we go bishop takes e4, and then just see, you can probably get a hint from the fact that it's
I know,
a question mark, but maybe it's not the best choice. But okay,
getting trapped. This is
but they can perhaps explain why that is.
So we're looking at an offside knight on a4, and I think this is what Sadler thought when he played this move.
So the idea is rook c4, because if white was to continue b3, black can just take the knight. So
is that just bad for white, or does white have a move here? We've had a suggestion of knight f6, but I don't think that's going to do it. I mean, it's the other knight that we're looking at.
Knight f6, yeah, it doesn't really help too much. It's giving away another pawn. If black just takes this way, then black's just collected a third pawn. Another pawn. So how many pawns at the moment? It's two at the moment. Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. Ed Jackson's got the right answer, b4, and so is William Chen. So well done to them.
b4, yeah. I mean, it's not such an easy move to see, particularly, I guess, when he took on e4. But yeah, just b4, just blocking. Although it looks very dangerous, it's not actually so dangerous because the knight's able to come back, and actually now my rook on h2 is actually quite useful. I mean, the position after bishop h5 is quite good for black. I hadn't played the opening at all well, so this was a kind of a rather lucky break. But then I was able to play c3, and the rook is protecting across. And I was able to consolidate the position somewhat. I was still quite tied up. But if we'll just zip forward. Oops.
Yeah, maybe they could explain what's important about that endgame, because
yeah, sorry, I was totally lost the things started going haywire there for me a minute. Let me just get to the final quiz position, because I think that's not a bad one to look at. I found this quite difficult at the board, I remember, certainly. It took a bit of thought.
It's a very important feature about this endgame, which...
Oops, okay, yep, so...
Yeah, I mean, your king doesn't look particularly safe.
No, so I mean, although I've kind of, I'm a piece up, obviously I'm very tied up. The bishop on d4 is a very powerful piece. My king's not very active, and it's also not very safe. And his king is actually pretty safe on f8. There's just nothing near it. And obviously he's got his rooks very powerfully placed on the b file. So I thought for quite a while about this rook c2, because I was quite concerned about the move that he actually played in the game, rook b1, which has the rather nasty threat of rook a1 mate. But then I realized that actually there was a good response to this move, which I'm sure you're about to suggest for white. The mating threat certainly helps to focus attention.
Yeah.
But perhaps you can kind of understand why it's good, because what the problem is for black here?
Yeah, a few people have said knight b3, but that can just be captured and then
Knight b3, well, black could capture that with either rook, so that's not a good idea.
Worse. We've had suggestion from Shivam of rook takes d4.
So okay, well let's look at rook takes d4 as we don't have too much time left.
Yeah, you're right.
So if black recaptures, which was what happened in the game,
yes,
I will say, so that is correct.
Okay, so white to play now, and I'm sure that Micky had some ideas in his head at this point of like how we can win this position, like one of the like key features of this end game that he's gone for. Okay, so people have suggested bishop takes f4.
So bishop takes f4. Okay, well let's go with that because that's a very sensible move. It picks up a pawn and obviously attacks the rook on b8. So rook b5. So what's the big idea of this sacrifice? Because I mean now black's got two very active rooks. He's attacking my knight. He's got a powerful passed pawn, and white's not really very much material ahead anymore. So what was the actual idea of this rook takes d4 idea that I'd said?
Theo said a4 now.
So a4, and so the point about a4 is that if black keeps on moving his rook, say on the b file somewhere,
we just keep attacking it.
Yeah, that's basically the point. The point is bishop c7, and so if the rook comes to b4, which is the only square remaining, because basically my rook is covering b2, the knight is covering b3 and b7, and now the bishop is starting to target the dark squares.
Yeah, well done. Lots of people have got bishop d6 check now.
So bishop d6 check just picks up the exchange, which should be winning. He actually took here now instead, so he's still got a couple of pawns. But this position's fairly easily winning. I have the advantage that I have the right bishop for the rook's pawn, so I can always swap rooks in any position if it's convenient for me. And I managed to convert it. I perhaps won't go through the rest of the game
because we're a bit short.
We're a bit low on time, and it's perhaps not so exciting. But you can probably look at that later if you're interested. But I gradually picked off black's pawns, and I think he resigned. I think he actually resigned at the adjournment. If you're wondering, if you think he resigned a bit early, I think this was actually in the days when you played 40-2, 20-1, and adjourned at move 60. And I think he didn't fancy coming back, given the position wasn't so hopeful. It wasn't. It's not like these days where you play every game to a finish.
Okay, well that's brilliant. Thanks for sharing those two games from your youth with us. Now let's get back to the questions because I've got lots of questions left.
Okay.
So I should be able to see my screen now. We've just got back to the PowerPoint and we were just talking about Cornwall where we left it, and now I'm going to move on to preparation. So when you prepare for tournaments, how do you prepare, and do you just prepare when you're at the tournament, or do you do it a long time in advance for the competition?
Well, I mainly prepare in advance, but I'm a professional player, so that's sort of normal for me. I think everyone has their own routine, and it's a bit different. I personally feel that there's a limit to how much preparation you want to do at big tournaments. I normally try and limit things to maybe an hour or two in the morning, just to try and refresh some lines that I think are likely to come up, and to look at my opponent. It depends a bit who you're playing, of course. Sometimes I play opponents I know really well, so I start with a lot of information. But sometimes if I'm playing Gibraltar or something, I might be playing someone I've never played before and I don't know very much about them. So then it's already a question of looking at quite a few of their games and, building up a picture of information about them. I don't normally prepare much the night before, particularly in things like opens where you don't know the pairings until quite late. So I mainly do stuff on the day. So I think you want to have a balance, and you want to kind of try and get some time to go out for a walk, or to maybe do something different before the game for half an hour, to watch television or read a book, or just not to be thinking directly about chess, so you can come a little bit fresh to the game. I think that's always good advice, and I still would have that routine now, and have had that pretty much throughout my career. So I think you need to have a balance. You know, it just depends, but it's very individual. I know some other guys have a completely different approach, and it works well for them. But that's how it works for me.
Yeah,
So I think you have to find your own technique. I mean, I know some guys on the English team have a very last minute moment approach to chess, and often I'll be waiting for the bus and I'll be there and they come late and they've been like, oh, I was looking at this line to the last minute, and I just think this is crazy, but they play very well like that and it works for them. So I don't think there's any one way to prepare that's right. You have to find what works for you, and that's basically what works for me. And when I go away from that, I think it just doesn't work as well. So I think it's mainly about finding your own method.
And you often go like for a walk or a run, don't you, before the game as well, just so you sort of fresh?
I don't run before the game. I often go running on the free day, or sometimes I go to the gym after the game. Particularly when we're away. Often with England, we go away and, you know, it's different time zone. And then I don't always get into the time zone that quickly. And then I find if I exercise after the game, I just sleep a lot better. So sometimes I do that if it's not a long game. And it's actually quite good if directly after the game, if you go to the gym somehow, you kind of, it seems it works for me. But okay, now I got older, it's a little bit different. When I was younger, I was a bit less disciplined, and I think you're just naturally more resilient. As you're older, you perhaps need to be a bit more cautious. Well, a bit like in Matthew's book you were talking about. So.
Yeah. Right. Okay, that's brilliant. So we're going to come on to like when you were a junior, and I've got quite a lot of questions, but I just wanted to talk about mindset first, before we get on to answering some specific questions that the children have put forward. So I'll just kind of go through these, but you can see them on my screen. But yeah. Like when you're in a game and you're doing well, and suddenly something goes wrong, like how do you cope with that, and how do you sort of get back into the zone and make sure that you do manage to come back and win the game, which you often do?
Well, I mean, you have to accept that this is part of chess. Good positions going wrong is part of chess. Obviously it's very unpleasant and you're very frustrated about the mistake you've made, but all you can try and do is move on with the new position. If you've got time available on the clock to spend a bit of time getting used to the change, that can be very helpful. It's normally worst when you're also running short of time and then you have a very unpleasant change because everything is happening really fast and the momentum is against you. So if you get to the time control sometimes and things have gone a bit wrong, it may be worth trying to have a bit of a think then. It may be worth trying to have a bit of a think when you get to the time control anyway, because the position might have changed a lot over the last few moves. But I mean, it's not easy, but you just have to continue the game the best you can. It's no different to some extent. If you have a bad position, it doesn't matter if you had a bad position the whole game or if you had a good position, now you have a bad position. If objectively there's some way to get something out of the game, then you just have to try and maximize the chances of that, whether it's groveling for a draw now. Well, okay, if that's where you are, that's where you are. There's not much to be done about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen you play games and you just seem to be like 100% focused the whole time. You don't get up much. You're very in the zone. Is that right? Do you just think about chess during the whole game?
Yeah, but again, that was something I really came to because I used to get up a lot more, and then I thought that I was getting distracted and losing the thread of games when I was walking around a lot. So I kind of experimented with walking around less. And then that seemed to work well for me. So I just carried on with it. It wasn't so much something that I always had. It was something that when I was younger, at one time I walked around a lot and then it became a bit more normal. And then I kind of thought, well, maybe it's better just not to walk around, really at all very much, or just to get up very occasionally, or when you need to go to the bathroom or whatever. Or when you feel really confident that the position is under control. So I didn't get up too much, or, if you're playing a team match, you need to kind of be aware of what's happening in the other boards. So it seemed to work well for me. So, but I think, I think my concentration is certainly when a game gets tense can be quite good, because I can be quite unaware of what's happening on other boards around me. During a tense period coming up to the time control, I might not really be aware what was happening on the next board to me. I mean, in the earlier stages, you're a bit aware, but to that extent, I think that's true. I have quite good focus there.
Okay, that's great. Like, how do you mentally prepare yourself for a big game? Because like you've beaten Magnus Carlsen. I remember you beat him in the Olympiad. How do you, like, if you're paired against somebody like Magnus, how do you mentally prepare yourself for it rather than sort of thinking, right, I've got a really hard game? How do you sort of think, right, I can win this?
I don't really prepare that differently. I mean, obviously, when you play a stronger player, you have slightly different expectations, and it depends which color you have also. But I mean, I think in general, I tend to take things in a similar way, that you kind of look for where you think is the best opening choices, and you don't really prepare in a specifically different way. And I tend to sort of look at it as a more positive thing. When Kramnik had a very big winning run, which actually in the end I managed to beat him in the game that broke the run, and people were going, oh, it's just not possible to beat him. But I mean, I kind of sort of had thought, well, okay, but you can also think about it, well, he's played 70, 80 games or whatever. I mean, I know that's not I know people have much longer streaks these days apparently, but that was considered a reasonably long streak at that time, and Kramnik was very, very strong and very solid at that time. So I thought, well, if he hasn't lost a game for so long, maybe it's nearer the end of the streak than the beginning. So you can always kind of take some small positive, but in general, I think when you play a stronger player, you shouldn't really approach it that differently. And also, most players I play are quite strong anyway. So although Magnus is obviously of a different class, I still play other top 10 players from time to time as well, and I have done throughout my career. And whenever you play guys, top 50 or whatever, they're all very serious players. Yeah, they're not as good as Magnus, but it's all about on their day. On the day you play them, they might well, if they have a good day and Magnus had a bad day, it's not such a big difference. So you just have to play and see what happens. And yeah, if you're playing Magnus, you hope he doesn't have a good day, because that's not much fun, as I know.
I remember when you beat him in the Olympiad, it was good. He went for a bit of a crazy opening, didn't he? But it was good. Okay, thank you very much. One more question now, then we'll move on to the junior questions because we're running out of time. So I just wanted to ask you about ratings, because people are obsessed about ratings, especially now they change more frequently. Do you ever think, I'm playing a rating of 2850 or something, or lower than you, maybe 2500, and you start thinking, oh, what are the consequences if I lose? What if this happens? Or do you just play the opponent, just play the game, rather than thinking and worrying about your rating?
No, not really. I mean, when I prepare, I think about it, because I don't know, if I play someone, I don't know, 200 points lower rated than me with black, then I might look to try and choose something more combative, or at least something which doesn't simplify too early, so at least the game will carry on for a while and keep some tension, or something like this. So I might make a slightly different opening choice, but it's, it just depends who you're playing. It also depends how much they know about the openings. But in general, I don't think very much about ratings. I think it's also something now, I don't really look at ratings during a tournament. After a tournament, I might go and see how my rating changed. I normally have some idea anyway, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not looking at, I don't like win a game in the first round and go and look to see what my rating is. I'm not that during the tournament. It's not something, it's just something to check afterwards. And it's not such a big thing for me. I think when I was younger, I was a bit more interested in it, but I'm not sure rating changes so much. And in general, if you start thinking about rating during the game, I can't see how there's going to be anything other than counterproductive. Of course, when you play a weaker player, you want to find a way to beat them, but okay, it's not so easy. Particularly guys I play, if you play someone 2500, well, they have huge chess knowledge, even though they're rated 200 points below me. So it's you obviously have to give them a lot of respect. It's not a question of thinking, I have higher numbers, I'm going to win the game. You have to win the game over the board. I mean, no one won a game because they had a higher rating. They won the game because they played better moves. They're better qualified to do that if they have a higher rating, but you only win a game by making good moves. And every chess game, you have to start anew and justify your rating. So there's no reason to think because you have a higher rating, you have some right just to win the game.
Yeah, that's really Really good. Do you mind if we run over by a few minutes?
No, it's okay. If you want to just finish up, that's fine.
Yeah, so basically we have some questions from the children, and I wanted some sort of top tips from you on how to improve. But I'm just going to start. We've got a question from Charlie and a question from Kenneth, and then maybe you can give a few tips. So don't need to spend too long answering them since we're out of time. So Charlie Ball, a good question. What was your favourite tournament win and why?
Well, probably two of my bigger tournament wins were Dortmund and Dos Hermanas, which I really enjoyed those. I think because I found it very difficult to win tournaments, even when I was a top 10 player or even top 5 player, partly because Kasparov used to just win them all, perhaps in the same way that to some extent Carlsen wins all the tournaments these days. And then if he didn't, guys like Anand or Kramnik would tend to win them. So, I mean, Kasparov didn't actually play in those events, but Kramnik played in both of them, and Kramnik and Anand played in one. So I suppose they were my biggest tournaments wins. But I mean, you know, there are just lots of different tournament successes. I guess winning the British Knockout and winning the British Championship in the same year in 2019 was also, you know, now I'm a much older player. They were two big successes for me. So, you know, when you have a long career, you sort of have lots of successes, I guess.
Great, thank you. And related to this topic now, this is from Kenneth. Looking back, what would you have done differently when you were 11 in terms of your chess? And I think Kenneth is 11, so that's probably
well, not so. Yeah, not so much. I think because I don't think I had, you know, a huge number of resources to do things differently, and the things that I did probably worked out quite well for me, but they were sort of very old-fashioned things that I mean, Peter Clark was probably the strongest player in Cornwall when I was starting off, and he tended to run all the bookstores. I mean, he actually retired from competitive play when I was quite young, but he sort of said, oh, well, you should get books of all the world champions and study their games. And I read quite a lot of books like that, and that was definitely useful to me. But obviously now it's a bit different, and there are lots of other resources that weren't available then. I think one thing I did that was good, and I would say would be a top tip, was I tried to play as many games as possible. And when I could, I tried to talk to people at tournaments. I think I learned a lot, maybe not so when I was 11, but as I was getting older, and I would play with guys maybe like Mark Hebden, Keith Arkle in weekend tournaments, and just discussing games with them afterwards, or maybe even other stuff afterwards. I learned a lot from that. So just maybe from hanging around other strong players and discussing things from them and learning things. I learned a lot from that throughout my career, not only when I was a junior. So I think you can often learn things because people just say things and it gives you a different perspective that you don't think of yourself.
Great, thank you. So we've got your top tips. So we've got play as many games as possible, and I assume that means go through them as well and talk to strong players.
Yeah, I would say play as many games as possible and look at your own games. I mean, when I think a question, I'm not sure it got asked in the end, was, do I look at the game with the computer afterwards? I don't normally look at the game with the computer afterwards massively, unless there's some huge kind of, you know, jump in numbers just to kind of see what the thing is. But I normally have like a position during the game that I'm curious about, and then I'll put that position on the computer and look at it, you know, then just to kind of, and maybe save the analysis of that particular position because it's something that I remember. If you don't look at it after the game, then you somehow lose the memory of the urgency of that moment and how during the game it was an important moment. So I think that's a good tool that you have now, which I didn't, but I still think to look at games. So
yes, I need one more top tip for the juniors then. That's really good. Finish on one more top tip.
I would say to try and think independently. I know I've sort of said that earlier, but to try and work things out for yourself. Sometimes if your first impression is that it's a good idea to ask someone, maybe try and work things out for yourself. And if you can't work it out for yourself, then you can go and ask them, and then you can explain what you thought and why you couldn't get to it. why you couldn't get to the solution. So you don't just go, I've got a problem, get someone to give me the solution, try and solve it for yourself first. And the same to some extent with the computer. Sometimes it's worth thinking about a position first before you put the computer on. Sometimes that can be a very good way to study.
That's great.
So yeah, I think maybe leave it there.
Yeah,
I think
that's
maybe there's some other things they might pick up from some of my other answers earlier.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I did ask the questions in advance, so we got through everyone that asked questions in advance. Sorry, I couldn't answer all the ones in the chat. But thank you very much, Micky, for your time. And yeah, really, really good session and really inspiring, I think, for the children. So thank you very much. And yeah, well, hopefully we'll see you at some over the board chess soon once things get back to normal.
Okay, well, thanks to everyone for coming, and well done to all of you who got the puzzles right. Sadly, we didn't even get to see my win against Jim Zaskett, but there you go.
Okay,
You can't win them all.
I'll share the link with them and they can have a look afterwards.
Okay, all right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.